Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Smart Protein Summit on day three. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining us. We're very much in the swing of things as we think through the pathways for the next decade to build a more healthy, sustainable, and just global food system. I want to take a quick opportunity to thank all of our sponsors for making this summit possible. So, AAK, ADM, DuPont, Richcore Life Sciences, Puris, Vega Foods, and Wenger, thank you very much for your support and for everything you're doing to advance the alternative protein or smart protein sector. I was thrilled yesterday to have the Department of Biotechnology's Secretary, Dr. Renu Swaroop, an extremely well-respected scientist, send us a message about what that department is doing to advance biotechnology in various sectors in India. Today, I am thrilled as well and very grateful to have another extremely well-respected, distinguished scientist, Dr. K. VijayRaghavan, the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, send us a message. Dr. VijayRaghavan has one of those bios that if you read it, it could take up the entire session. So I will read an abridged version of it. He's a distinguished professor and former director of the National Center for Biological Sciences. With several laurels to his name, Dr. VijayRaghavan was appointed as the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India in 2018, prior to which he had served as the Secretary of the Department of Biotechnology. In 2012, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and in 2014, he was elected as a Foreign Associate of the US National Academy of Sciences. He has also been conferred one of India's highest civilian honors, the Padma Shri, in 2013, and is a recipient of the Infosys Prize in the Life Sciences category. And in keeping with the theme from yesterday when we talked about how Dr. Renu Swaroop has a species of microbe named after her, I want to tell you that Dr. VijayRaghavan has a species of gecko named after him, the Hemidactylus vijayaraghavani. So without further ado, thank you very much to Dr. VijayRaghavan. He's been extremely busy over the last months dealing with the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you might imagine. I do also want to say that Dr. VijayRaghavan and his office of the Principal Scientific Advisor have been very busy setting up the Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy 2020, which will think through how we can respond to these changes in the global economy and especially to the COVID-19 pandemic as a country over the next 10 years. And of course, with climate change, pandemic risk, zoonotic disease, food security, all of these issues being a key piece of what the government wants to think about for the next decade, we at GFI India are certainly going to work very closely with them to think through how alternative protein, how smart protein can be embedded within that science, technology, and innovation policy. So really, without further ado this time, let me welcome Dr. VijayRaghavan and thank him very much for his message. I hope you will all enjoy this, and I'll see you in the next session with Rajiv Chitrabhanu, where we talk about investment in the alternative protein space. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today at the Smart Food Summit. The task you've taken up to have a sustainable approach to both agriculture, nutrition, and food security is something very important. The question is, how can one attain that? In order to understand that, we need to have a brief survey on how we came to the situation we are in today. We are in a situation where we will have, by about 2050, the need to feed about 10 billion people in a manner which does not damage the environment, yet provides them with adequate nutrition, particularly high sources of protein and nourishment of all kinds. Typically, such kind of nourishment and many of the components essential for our growth and well-being come from animal sources. Yet, animal sources, even dairy and eggs, for example, take a lot of energy inputs going into them to rear them, and other sources such as meat, fish, and so on also take in a lot of resources. So how does one balance the requirement of human need for sources of food which come from these examples, but at the same time have a sustainable mechanism by which we feed the planet? Now, over about 10,000 years ago, humans domesticated plants and animals, and that resulted in a substantial growth of human society and humans on this planet. Yet, as agriculture and domestication of animals started to grow, human society reached a certain barrier. The kind of nutrients and the extent of nutrition which plants required for them to grow, and then other domesticated animals and us also needing food, was enormous. Where would those nutrients come from? Primarily, where would they come from? Into the soil. Now, the soil nitrogen was running out, and therefore, human ingenuity got guana, bird droppings from all over the world, and used that to get nitrogen for soil. As that ran out, nitrite mines were used, and they were used to supplement nitrogen in the soil. As that ran out, the invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which allowed the making of ammonia using nitrogen from the atmosphere, was something which was transformative. That gave what we thought was a relentless and unending supply of nitrogen to be used for fertilizers and, sadly, for other uses also, such as explosives and at that time when the Haber-Bosch process was invented, for chemical warfare also. So in other words, humans have constantly thought that they have had the ability to overcome hurdles by ingenuity and science and technology. Now, there are many aspects of our lives over the last several thousands of years where this is absolutely true. But there's also another aspect which we have done, which we need to keep in mind. While we have provided nutrition, food, and lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty like never before in human history, we also face challenges today as never before in human history, and those challenges are qualitatively different from those faced earlier, and therefore are not readily surmountable by economic forces and the forces of technology alone. We have to think this through in a more careful and logical manner. The consequences of not having done that sufficiently are what we see today in the effects of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and lack of sustainable development. In other words, while humans have managed to allow quantitative upliftment of many people out of poverty, and while that can actually continue, a qualitative improvement in our lives is something which we need to get in multiple ways, and that requires sustainable development, which includes care of biodiversity and taking care of aspects of climate change. Now, as I said, you need to imagine new ways of food production if you have to feed everyone in a sustainable manner by 2050. In particular, the current global protein supply is reliant on industrialized animal agriculture and marine hunting. And this is an important issue which needs to be addressed because otherwise you have consequences such as climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. That's why many scientists have said that industrialized animal agriculture is one of the top 3 causes of the world's most pressing environment problems, including climate change, and also a major driver of zoonotic disease and pandemic risk. And therefore, overall, this issue needs to be addressed. As global demand for protein increases, driven by emerging economies, and you can see the use of proteins from animal sources dramatically increases in countries as their economies grow, we need to think of a balance of other ways of looking at protein sources so that sustainable development and growth can take place without causing all the other problems which I've talked about. So there are many ways to do that, and which also allow us to get in all the nutrition which we currently get substantially from animal sources. And this involves the use of science and technologies in intelligent ways, using microorganisms to cultivate different kinds of food products and also create nutrients which can be used in our food, and use multiple tools such as the tools of biotechnology, genetic engineering, and so on to make safe and healthy foods which can be sustained and grown in a large manner. Now, the important point here is that many countries have embarked on this, and for example, Canada and others, but there are many different ways in our context which we can have different sources of protein on large scale. Indigenous crops such as millets, pulses, hemp, etc. offer huge promise, and scaling up their production in sensible ways, along with other ways which use fermentation and so on, allow the creation of value-added smart proteins, which will be a significant driver of our health and our economy, but also a promising solution to the problem of malnutrition and other kinds of threats which come from overuse of domesticated or industrialized scale animal production, problems such as antibiotic resistance, for example, will be lessened. So it's also important to keep in mind in the context of countries such as us and those which surround us and emerging economies. Nutrition, climate, and public health vulnerabilities are felt disproportionately by countries of the South, and low and middle income countries are particularly vulnerable. And therefore, a global response is needed to provide a supportive ecosystem for this sector to thrive and add value and build upon regional advantages. So this is a very good opportunity, the summit which you've undertaken. I'm sure that the proceedings will go very well. I wish I could have been there in person. But our scientists, I noticed there are scientists from many institutions over here. Our scientists will be deeply engaged, and we will work together to try and see how this new race to provide sustainable food to the planet can have India